Ladies and gentlemen, my international friends, I would like to welcome you to this debate. Today, we are debating on whether globalization's impact is positive or negative. We defined globalization as a process of interaction between different people, different countries, different companies. This is driven by IT and has effect on culture, political systems, on economic development and prosperity, on environment and on human physical well-being in societies around the world. With great threats, great problems, great epidemics that no single government could ever stop, governments have to unite. After World War II, it became clear that there are threats that no single government could deal with. And no, Benedict Cumberbatch didn't end World War II. Nations did. Unity did. This is why unions between nations were established, mainly UN, NATO, G7 or EU. These international organizations exist only thanks to globalization. And don't be misled. Effects of this international organization are also on local level, everywhere in the world, making life better. This is one of the main reasons globalization is good. It made this organization. The biggest benefits are peacekeeping and establishing democracy. Other benefits like fight for human rights or healthcare will be discussed by the third and fourth speaker. So, peacekeeping. This organization were formed to end small threats everywhere in the world. By uniting, nations are stronger and can help and solve conflicts. Local conflicts that might seem irrelevant in the world, but actually save lives and resources. There are 16 ongoing missions right now. Thanks to globalization, peace is kept. We have solved conflicts in El Salvador and Guatemala. This is what we stand for: peace and human lives. Also, establishing democracy. We have seen successful missions, for example, in Iraq.
For information,
There you go.
what about peacekeeping missions in Haiti when they gave color to the entire island?
It was better than nothing. This organization sent people there to keep peace. Sometimes they are successful, most of the time they are successful, and yes, there are failures. So, to conclude, globalization formed these great unions like the United Nations. Thanks to globalization, peace is protected everywhere in the world, and democracy is established and protected. This is exactly what we stand for: peace, democracy, free voting. So I urge you to vote for the proposition. Thank you.
What do you think of when you hear the word globalization? Yellow McDonald's French fries, an ice-cold glass of Coca-Cola, the American flag blowing in the wind surrounded by iPhones, babbling the English language? Fair enough, we all do. But can we as the general public confirm the fact that the outcomes of this global phenomenon are overwhelmingly positive? Have each and every one of us seen the horrifying amounts of global pollution, the millions of people worldwide losing their jobs for the greater good of an offshore company, and the popularized unhealthy lifestyle effects on society as a whole? I don't feel so sure anymore, ladies and gentlemen. To clear things up a bit, let me go ahead and say that we as the opposition would like to reject the statement that the positive effects of globalization for both developing and developed countries outweigh the negatives. We'd also not like to support the fact that giving cholera to Haiti through a peacekeeping mission was positive. This brings me to the first argument of the evening for the opposition team: linguistic imperialism. Ladies and gentlemen, the English language has rendered itself to become not only a form of self-expression, but a sign of class in the international community. It is estimated that nearly 50% of the world's population is bilingual, and the majority of those individuals speak English to a certain degree. English has become the hallmark of a preferred laborer, an educated scholar.
If you're speaking more than one language, it's bad.
Well, I think if English is chosen as the major language for a universal environment is bad because the eradication of other languages would be pointless. No, thank you. would be pointless because ensuring communication globally through many different languages, because languages is a tool for communication. And anyways, while we're at it, why did we choose English, ladies and gentlemen? English itself has been globalized due to its dominant economy and internationalized popular culture that has been pushed on nations around the globe. For example, have you ever heard of Marilyn Monroe? What about Kim Kardashian? The scope of popular culture references don't only come from the United States, but primarily from developed nations. For instance, do you by any chance know the Beatles? And even more currently, what about One Direction? These English language-based phenomena serve as perpetuation of the language itself. They donate themselves to also develop the Western culture and in effect eradicate cultures of those around the globe that do not rely on the intense global marketing strategies or social media endorsements. The cultures, along with their traditions, language, political systems, schools of thought, and more, that have only been lost, can only attest to the irreversible changes we've made in the past. Ladies and gentlemen, we can't go back from this. We can't get back the cultures, the languages, the books, the inventions, or the knowledge. We can't save those that we've left behind on our path to globalization. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen, whenever we mention the word globalization, we mention the negative effects it has on the environment in almost the same breath. But shouldn't the question be if those accusations placed in globalization are actually true? Our opposition most likely supports the statement that environmental problems are, to an extent, caused by international trade, which normally requires transport. But if one were actually to look at the breakdown of CO2 emissions, it becomes apparent that international shipping only accounts for 3 to 5% of the total CO2 emissions. To put this into a better perspective, the average cargo ships emits 15 to 20 kilograms of CO2 per ton kilometer. However, the average truck, which is the normal transport medium for regional transport, it produces 50 kilograms of CO2 per kilometer. This, ladies and gentlemen, is more than twice the amount a cargo ship produces. Therefore, the claim that international trade causes the environment more harm than regional trade stands mostly unsupported. Moreover, if one were to, yes?
Is trucking not also a part of international trade, as countries can share the same landmass and thus require trucking across borders?
But if one were to look at the regional products that are produced and are regionally transported, even within a continent, that still doesn't require shipping or flight transportation. So one would still have the trucks. No, thank you. Moreover, Moreover, if one were to broadly analyze the trends, one would most commonly find negative outcomes. Of course, a look at the surface of negative outcomes only produces negative effects. But if one were to delve deeper, one could easily find that foreign direct investment can actually facilitate adopting cleaner production methods. For example,
Point of information?
no, thank you. For example, in China, the high standards of German green production are actually matched not only in export products but also in domestic products. Now, climate change. One of the favorite topics when talking about the negative effects globalization has on the environment is supposedly worsened by globalization. However, various scientific sources support the idea that globalization has in fact nothing to do with it. Based on scientific techniques available to us today, researchers have found out that the first millennium was, on average, a lot warmer than the second. More specifically, More specifically, the time period between 1000 and 1315 AD was fittingly dubbed the medieval warm period, mainly because the temperatures were, on average, a lot warmer than the temperatures we have today. And ladies and gentlemen, I think we can all agree that this time was long before the onset of the trend we commonly now know as globalization. Now, just to summarize my point quickly, I mentioned the small contribution international trade actually makes to the total CO2 emissions, as well as the positive changes in developing countries because of foreign direct investment. And lastly, I talked about the natural changes in Earth's temperature from global cooling to global warming. I therefore ask you, ladies and gentlemen, to uphold this proposition.
Ladies
being created by nature, we call it progress. Unlike the proposition, I won't be focusing on the tiny positive effects of globalization. I want to talk about something bigger. Land is losing fertility. The air is becoming toxic. The ozone is dying. Grasslands have been overgrazed and fisheries overharvested. No. Water bodies have suffered extensively and areas where gardens once flourished are now concrete deserts. No. In recent decades, environmental problems have become globalized in terms of their existence and impacts, as well as the factors that generate them. Developed countries like the United States, for example, are suffering from all kinds of problems. Air and water pollution, declining animal species, soil erosion, deforestation, I could go on. Yeah.
Well, cows have been a great producer of methane worldwide. I believe Americans really like their steaks.
The rather extreme heat the UK experienced over the past week is damning evidence of how far global warming has come. We are consuming resources at a rapid rate, both renewable and non-renewable. This can't go on much longer. Unfortunately, the ones in control are often the wealthy and developed nations. Developed nations use developing nations as supply depots. They obtain a large chunk of the natural resources they consume from those nations. Developed nations also use, yes?
For example, by sending humanitarian aid, like this person.
Yes, and also taking their minerals and resources and deforesting their forests and dumping their waste in them.
It depends whether you're hungry or not.
No. Developed nations also use developing nations as waste repositories by shipping waste to them for disposal. Thus, while the developed nations may appear to be pioneers in ecological modernization, they manage to protect their own environments or living spaces by getting their resources and dumping their waste in developing nations. While the developed nations appear to be moving forward when it comes to their ecological footprint, the developing nations are very often paying the price for them. This doesn't just mean that these countries are overburdened by waste, ladies and gentlemen. It also means that they cannot use their own resources.
Point of information?
No. Developing nations may be given incentives to destroy forests which gave life to their local populations and build private ranches and farms whose profits are primarily exported to, take a wild guess, developed nations. Developed countries are taking from them what is rightfully theirs and using them as trash cans. Developing countries trying to attract foreign investment try to establish favorable business conditions. They often provide exemptions to regulations meant to protect them and their people. Yes?
Well, I know quite a lot about using trash cans, but I don't think using a trash can includes increasing its GDP.
Increasing its GDP by polluting its environment and killing its own people? The Bhopal gas tragedy of 19...
What do you worry? What do you mean by killing?
I am not taking your
Sit down, please.
The Bhopal gas tragedy of 1984 left 8,000 dead and 200,000 injured due to the negligence of the Union Carbide factory officials. Is this okay? Is this progress? Ladies and gentlemen, we need to protect the environment. But how and why have we reached this point where the environment needs our desperate protection? What has brought us here? I don't just want to protect the environment, I want a world where the environment doesn't need protection. And if you really think the economy is more important than the ecology, try holding your breath while you count your money.
Ladies and gentlemen, fellow globalists and opposition, I'm here tonight to bring to your attention the positive impact of globalization on human rights. From the point of view of human rights, the word globalization is celebrated as it means greater freedom, greater security, greater protection for many societies all around the world. Before the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, governments were very powerful, and no one was able to react to the violations of human rights. Nowadays, more pressure is put on governments to respect all human rights, not only due to international organizations, but also due to the negative consequences that the action of not respecting human rights could have for the international image, and how that will potentially harm their economy and trade by sanctioning and political pressure. There is also external critique on developing countries and international intervention on situations of massive non-compliance with the compact. Thus, all countries are obliged to respect human rights. No, thank you. The United Nations organization is the child of globalization and has as a main goal the general well-being of all people, as already elaborated by our first speaker. No, thank you. Through UN, we can prosecute war crimes against human rights, and there are more than 17 million aided refugees, and their rights and well-being are protected by the UN. As the UN is a global family, it takes care of its weakest members by giving food aid. No, thank you. And more specifically, by helping 104 million people in more than 80 countries. Through globalization, we can get informed, and there is awareness raised about all that concerns women's rights. It is clear, for example, that especially in underdeveloped and developing countries of the world, women subjected to domestic violence suffer from rape during peace and wartime, sexual abuse and harassment. They are denied opportunities to work outside the home, and when not, suffer from unequal pay and other discriminatory treatment. In many cases, there are substantial barriers to political participation in their societies. Globalization.
Point of information.
No, thank you. Globalization has affected women's rights and has led to women's liberation movements all across the world, such as He4C movement for gender equality, which occurred on 2015, and the 1975 International Year of Women.
Point of information.
Yes.
Why are you listing out the disadvantages of globalization? You said women abuse.
If you wait, you will see.
All right, thank you.
Nowadays, women have the same opportunities in education and work. Women have become independent individuals, active and highly valued members of the society.
Point of information.
No, thank you, and no, thank you. Globalization has also affected child labor and child exploitation have existed since ancient times. They can be traced back to the first Chinese emperor. If we don't know that these problems exist, how can we solve them? Globalization has made us more aware of those problems these days because of, no thank you, of the raised awareness due to the information age we live in, and Western consumers making an effort to buy products that have been certified as not produced under child exploitation, such as good weed, certified drugs based in Afghanistan. Moreover, globalization has helped in United Nations.
I'm going to have to ask the speaker to finish.
Can I just...
One again.
To summarize, I talked about the efforts of globalization, government respect for human rights, the UN as the positive agent in caring for people around the world, and the raised awareness about child labor and exploitation as well as women's rights. Therefore, I ask you to think carefully about my points as well as the points of my fellow speakers and to support your proposition. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we already talked about threats that globalization imposes on the developing countries. Well, it's high time to focus on the developed ones. I'm going to focus on the global trade that, although has its upsides, I'm going to show you their overwhelming downsides. So stay tuned. Firstly, I'm going to talk about a fairly large country I'm not sure the whole proposition group has ever heard of. China. It is a well-known fact that China manipulates currencies, more specifically the US dollar. China buys the US dollar with its own currency, yuan, in order to devaluate yuan and strengthen the US dollar, making Chinese prices more competitive and boosting its exports and making it harder for the USA to sell products abroad.
Point of inquiry.
No, thank you. But the problem lies even deeper. China has over $3.3 trillion in stock. That amount of money could easily be used to cause hyperinflation. Hence, we believe that globalization gives the tool to manipulate countries. There is another problem that the USA, thank you very much, is facing in terms of globalization. Outsourcing. US companies have outsourced over 2.25 million jobs to countries like China, India, or Malaysia. These people are paid, thank you very much, paid less, made to work longer hours, and kept in worse conditions. And all that just to bring more income for huge international corporations. Yes, the prices in Walmart will be lower, but the US economy is already struggling with unemployment. So here is a question to the proposition. Why exacerbate the problem at the expense of developing countries? Speaking of bad working conditions, there have been many tragedies triggered by badly kept sites. For example, that tragedy in Bhopal, a city, thank you very much, in India, because of exacerbated to make the problem worse.
Okay.
Because of rusty pipes, 42 tons of toxic gas leaked, killing up to 25,000 people and injuring 500,000. The American company to which this plant belonged to, it refused to decontaminate the city, leaving it with high levels. Yes.
What kind of outsourcing are you talking about? External,
Outsourcing?
internal? Yes, you were talking about outsourcing, how this American company did not take responsibility. What kind of outsourcing are you talking about?
Oh, they had a plant that made
External or internal?
external.
Alright, then it was not their liability.
Thank you
I
very
am
much.
to conclude.
Conclude. All right. The American company to which this plant belonged to refused to decontaminate the city, leaving it with high levels of mercury and carcinogenic substances, making living in this area a health threat. There is another issue of outsourcing that I would like to discuss: tax avoidance. No, not tax evasion, tax avoidance, because it is legal. Because it is not illegal, so therefore it's legal. In fact, many companies do it. I'm sure of you, some of you use Google or Amazon or drink coffee at Starbucks. Well, these companies were busted avoiding taxes in the UK and paying them in countries with lower rates. As you all can see, globalization allows robbing countries. The last treat I have for you is over urbanization. On the example of Sao Paulo, the Brazilian city, I will prove that outsourcing has indirectly caused spread of certain diseases. It all started with companies like Cisco Systems, HP, or Dell outsourcing jobs.
Finish, please.
Yes, of course. Suddenly, Brazilians from the countryside started to flood the city, and because there were not enough houses, the people started living in temporary shelters in the suburbs. These suburbs later became known as favelas on shanty towns. The lack of sewage made diseases like typhoid or dysentery spread rapidly, making a health big concern in the whole city. In the end, I would like to stress the fact that, as I have just showed you, globalization has made it possible to avoid high taxation, manipulate countries, or in result cause diseases. Thank you very much.
We remind panelists to try to stick to the time allowed.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I will speak about the social dimension of globalization, which refers to the impact on the life of people and societies. The first aspect I'm going to talk about, of course, is education. Education is experiencing constant changes under the influence of globalization. These are caused primarily by the development of communication and technology, which are shifting society towards a more information-based society. The rise of this new global society demands a more competitive market. This is very important because it encourages a more skilled workforce. In other words, since the future of all countries depends on their ability to compete in the world market, it is an advantage to having an educated population. A 1,000 years ago, nobody really cared about education. All that mattered was to have a large army and a lot of land. And now it has become a key to success. China, whose economy is growing at an exponential rate, has been spending more and more on education, 20% more actually, since 1990, which resulted into a literacy rate of 97.5%. Also, due to the increased competition for the entrance of an excellent school, the learners will be under more pressure to prepare themselves better. Similarly, the teachers and the staff will work harder to keep the school in better position. And let's not forget about the new doors opened by the improvement of technology. More programs and education material is available in electronic form. This is great because it saves time, space, and the environment, since trees aren't cut to use paper. Some might argue that globalization is leading to the privatization of education and is becoming a business, but they're forgetting that first, investments leads to research and development. Second, more universities are offering students loans and scholarships. Third, many countries like, for example, Germany and Scotland, offering taxation-free universities. Fourth, huge non-profit organizations who benefit from globalization, such as UNESCO, are building schools in developing countries. Yes? Especially in Africa, therefore opening possibilities for education. And last but not least, it's a known fact that global literacy rates have risen in the last decades. Another dimension affected by globalization is healthcare. Although it is true that due to the rapid mobility of people across the globe, the spread of diseases is facilitated, globalization offers a rapid response to such catastrophes. In addition, international networks of institutions coordinated by the World Health Organization, can rapidly detect and respond to these emergencies. Also, the rising awareness of health importance has induced the creation of public institutions across the world, for example, Obamacare in the US. I'd like to conclude by saying that the evolution of technology and communication can help cope with disasters that aren't linked with globalization in the first place. A fresh example is the Nepal earthquake, which occurred in April. Yes, on this last sentence. A million of people donated to the internet, even Facebook, thus helping country in need. How can one be so close-minded to believe that globalization isn't affecting society positively when it helped millions of survivors get through this unexpected catastrophe? Thank you for that.
Ladies and gentlemen, significant research has been presented in forms of many studies and tests in the effort to complete the fact that non-communicable diseases are the health crisis of the globalized world. Think about the non-communicable diseases, also known as NCDs. This way, raise your hand if you know or did know of someone who has or had cancer. What about diabetes? Do you know someone who has or had a heart attack? In order to give a more specific scope of the NCDs, we need to look at the population affected. An example of such, presented by the Council on Foreign Relations, was stated that 90% of children with leukemia in high-income countries can be cured by But 90% of those with diseases in the world's 25 poorest countries died from it. Nothing. These diseases are not diagnosed by chance, and their growing prevalence in the youth and the young adults of the global community, and the global community is alarming. The reasoning behind the developing popularity of these diseases stems simply from an unhealthy lifestyle. These lifestyles are filled to brim with diets revolving around fast food, and with detrimental habits like smoking and drinking. Permanently, poverty and the driving force behind the current popularity of fast food. The American lifestyle revolves around fast food. As a trend originated, or it's most commonly associated with the land of the free. Ladies and gentlemen, 1 in 4 Americans visited a fast food restaurant. No, thank you. And it's estimated that over 110 billion United States dollars, no thank you, is spent a year on feeding Americans fast food. Another shocking fact is the rate of obesity, which has surpassed 60% of the population of the United States. But enough with reinforcing stereotypes. Let's focus on the change. Dominance globally, focusing primarily on McDonald's, the world's largest fast food chain.
Can we have the more points of information?
Which sells delicious and nutritious meals to 68 million people a day, a number which surpasses the population of Britain itself, has expanded to 119 countries worldwide, leaving only 79 to be organized by the legislature. At the end, I think that we could all agree that because of globalization, people are getting sick and dying from diseases that wouldn't have been half as effective as it would have been in the Western countries. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I kindly ask of you to vote for the opposition. Thank you.
Good evening, dear friends and despicable opposition. I'm here today to make sure you all acknowledge that globalization has a very positive influence in the global economy. Globalization, from an economic perspective, can be described as the ever-increasing integration of the world's local, regional, and national economies into a single international market. This includes free trade, free movement of labor, capital, and technology. Since the Roman times, economic globalization has always existed. For example, goods produced in Africa, India, or China were traded to Europe and can be found nowadays in European museums as relics. The first of the major effects that globalization has
Point of information.
Sure.
Do you know that a lot of labor in India and surrounding areas is forced by MNCs?
Yes. Just asking me to grasp in the Well, the first of the major effects that globalization has on the global economy is in producing enormous economic growth, which also means that, not see on the graph, a great increase in GDP per capita around the whole globe was created. We can also see from the graph that is not there, North Korea, which basically excluded themselves from globalization, has no economic growth compared to other great economies. This is driven firstly by free trade, available around many countries, which is
information.
no countries. Available around many countries, which is correlated to a general increase in world trade, allowing all of us to enjoy a nice sushi or a nice pizza wherever we are. This liberal economy is not only helping us consumers, but also big firms that can now produce with cheaper costs of labor and other costs of production, such as raw material and relatively cheap cost of transport, achieved with technologies that come from all around the world. The first train was built in Germany by two Brits. The first flying machine, a hot air balloon, was built by two French brothers, Montgolfier, and the first aeroplane was built in the United States by the Wright brothers. This low cost of production will sure help these companies make big profit, but it will also allow us to buy cheaper goods, and I'm sure you all like cheap goods. Talking of cheap
What
goods,
information?
no, you can sit down. Talking of cheap goods, globalization creates competition between international companies, so that we don't have monopolies and price falls. Other factors that help this huge increase in GDP per capita are foreign ownership of firms, which means big multinationals investing in many different countries, which also helps distribute GDP. Development and communication and IT, no, sit down, which allows us to speak with someone on the other part of our planet instantaneously. I'll just Other of the positive aspects concerning economics are an increase in employment in third world countries, as multinationals have different bases in different countries, and more importantly, the rise in income. There's no graph. Do you honestly believe that the world would benefit more without trade, without multinationals, without the great globalization?
Points of information.
Not point of information.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I will concentrate on the negative impact that globalization has on the economy of the world. As we all know, through globalization, there is a great spread of ideas, lifestyles, and information around the world. Due to this widespread flow of people, information, ideas, and lifestyles, it is already widely demonstrated that several modern behavioral factors such as unhealthy diet, physical inactivity, smoking,
Point of information.
alcohol misuse, and illicit drugs are having a profound impact on the human health. The fact that 17% of the global population, or 1,190,000,000 people, are living below the poverty line makes living healthy lifestyles hard. Moreover, globalization is against individual nations. This is because multinationals have international capitals. Therefore, there are no frontiers and no accountability. While nations are essential since they imply democratic institutions, globalization should not itself reflect any democratic principle.
Point of information.
Furthermore, multinational corporations exploit resources from countries such as Africa and Latin America, making them and their economy dependent. In addition, companies face greater competition because globalization puts small companies and industries at disadvantage, since they do not have the resources and possibilities